On the northern edge of South America is a tiny slice of the European Union. A demographic melting pot, French Guiana is a living experiment in identity. From prison colonies to outer space, French Guiana's story is little known, even in France itself. In this video we explore this tiny, forgotten territory to understand French Guiana today. These videos tell stories of places and people as I try to find the echoes of the past in the world of the present. In the previous video we looked at the awful origins of French Guiana, how France had little idea how to make use of it until it turned it into a prison colony for its worst convicts, who they sent here to suffer, and very often die. When this was wound down after World War II, colonization had still made little dent in the landscape. France had tried to turn it into a sugar colony, as it had on its Caribbean islands, and so imported Africans to work. The sugar didn't work out, but the people stayed. France is always funny about gathering information about race, so any estimates of ethnicity are just that, estimates. Creoles, people of mixed European and African ancestry, are probably the biggest group at maybe a quarter. Perhaps another quarter are Maroons, which is to say the descendants of escaped slaves, mostly living along the Maroni River, many having come to Guyane from neighbouring Suriname during the civil war there in the 1980s, which we will cover in the next videos. Maybe 1 in 10 people in Guyane are born in metropolitan France. You also have a tiny Amerindian population, and lastly, you have a full third of the population who aren't French, mainly from Suriname, Haiti, and Brazil. If you add it up, only a little over half of people in Guyane were born there. Now it has only around 300,000 people, but if you think that's small, as recently as the 1930s, it had less than 35,000 people. A century earlier, it had only half that. Though I'm assuming that number can't include many Amerindian people in the vast hinterland who are probably pretty hard to count in any census. It was only once they started trying to eradicate yellow fever and malaria in the 1950s that the population actually began to grow. So Guyane was searching for its purpose, and it found it in 1964.
L'année, c'est 700 km². Gabarit d'Ariane 6. Pas des câbles. Si vous vouliez prendre des photos de l'extérieur du bâtiment. Par contre, à l'intérieur, c'est strictement interdit.
With France losing its sight in the Sahara Desert when Algeria won its freedom in its bloody war of independence, it needed a new place to launch its rockets into space, and so Kourou was chosen to host the Guyana Space Center. Today it is the primary launch site of the entire European Space Agency, due to being able to use the extra rotational speed of the equator to fling the missions into orbit. So Europe launches its satellites from the coast of South America. And it is a massive deal in Guyane. Until Guyana struck oil just a couple of years ago, the massive influx of income from the Space Center made French Guiana the largest economy of the Guyanas, despite Suriname and Guyana having more than twice the population. And then, in the 1970s, a new wave of settlers arrived. They were brought from half a world away and given a patch of jungle to make something of. And what they created was something totally unlike anything else in the Guyanas, which I would discover with my travelling companion Dan on our first day exploring this forgotten little corner of France. We entered Guyane from Oiapoque, a small border town in the Brazilian state of Amapá. Entering the European Union from Brazil is as simple as crossing the river. It started raining, and it was surprisingly difficult to find the place to get our passports stamped, perhaps because there really aren't many tourists that pass through here. Guyane only has about 500 miles of paved roads, though this being France, the roads are nicer than anything else we saw on our travels in either the Guyanas or the Amazon. We were heading to Cacao. In 1977, Guyana received its newest wave of immigrants. They were the Hmong from Indochina. It's unclear where the Hmong came from originally, but they arrived in northern Vietnam and Laos from further north. Many of them took up Christianity, which they acquired from the French. Then, a lot of the Hmong in both Laos and Vietnam sided with the French against the nationalists and communists in the wars in Indochina from the 1950s onwards. When the communists won, the refugee camps in Thailand filled with Hmong. Feeling a duty of care, France needed something to do with them, and that is how they were brought to French Guiana. When they arrived, there were protests, people afraid that their colony would be swamped in Asian immigrants. The refugees were brought out here at night, protected by the army. When they arrived in Cacao, they had to build it from scratch. And this is what they've created out of the jungle. In all our time in French Guiana, we only met one other set of non-French tourists, though there were quite a few French ones. Despite this, there isn't a single hostel in the entire department. What there are carbets, where you can hang your hammock. On our first afternoon in Cacao, we decided to head straight into the forest. One of the benefits of being in Europe is that the infrastructure, with more funding, is generally better. This was the only place in the Guianas where we found a well-maintained trail with maps and signposts and felt safe enough to venture in by ourselves. It was pretty magical being able to swim in a jungle stream with the rain coming down all around us. We arrived back in the village as the farmers were returning home from their work in the fields. What they've made for themselves here is really quite extraordinary.
They had to clear the forest tree by tree using only their hands. Then they had to experiment to find out what grew in French Guiana's clay soil.
Très très dur, mais comment dire, c'est notre métier, quelle que soit la dureté du travail, on est obligé d'aller en avant.
La production agricole, fruitière et maraîchère des Hmong est essentielle pour la Guyane. Il représente 60 à 70% de cette production qui rend la Guyane autosuffisante à 80% de ses besoins. Et je crois vraiment ce qui fonde le succès des Hmong, c'est assez simple en réalité, c'est leur travail.
It was, by far, the safest I felt in all of my time in the Guianas. More than anywhere else I visited, it felt like a community. It's clear that social bonds, unlike elsewhere in the Guianas, are extremely strong. While the rest of French Guiana has one of the highest homicide rates of any French dependency, Cacao feels entirely peaceful. This being the rainforest, when it rains, it really does rain. There are only a couple of places to eat in Cacao, and we opted for the pizzeria. It says a lot about the place that the kids were still out having innocent fun, long after it was time for us to retire for the night. Walking around Cacao in the morning, you can see the farmers preparing for a day in the fields. The Hmong in Guyana today are almost all Roman Catholics. To my eye, they really seem to have thrived in their new home on the edge of South America. In fact, throughout this entire region, this is just about the only farming that I saw. It must have taken incredible effort to dig these orderly fields out of the rainforest. Well, effort and probably quite a lot of pesticide to keep nature at bay. Signs of their industriousness are everywhere. Everybody seems to be growing something, or keeps chickens or ducks or songbirds, presumably for sale. The post office seems to be where people gather and community information is displayed. They have a police station, although I don't know if they need it. Having spent weeks amid the pervasive insecurity of Guyana and the Brazilian Amazon, Cacao felt like a little paradise where the Hmong had carved out a model little community from their own sheer hard work. And they are proud of both where they've come from and, it seems, of being French. With our leftover pizza from the night before, Dan and I tried to hitch a ride. After a couple of hours without luck, we changed spots to near the river. We finally get one just in time before it started to rain. French Guiana is a very wet place indeed. Guyana gets more than 3,500 millimeters of rain in a year. Its average temperature only moves between 26 degrees in the coldest month and 27 degrees in the hottest. It breaks down, essentially, into two regions: the coastal strip where most people live, and the great rainforest extending into the continent. Like elsewhere in South America's rainforest, wildcat gold prospectors are a serious problem, and with so much unmonitored rainforest, so is illegal immigration, mostly miners who come across from Brazil, and their use of mercury, which poisons the water, the fish, and the people who eat the fish. Recently, they've been sending the French Foreign Legion out into the jungle to destroy the mining camps. French Guiana is both small and large. France's longest land border is in South America, with Brazil. It is also the second largest region of France, but has only 1/200th of its population, mostly split between one city and two towns. It is the most distant region of the EU, and the Guyana Amazonian Park is the EU's largest national park. And let's be clear, it's not just a French colony, but one of its departments. Everyone there is as French as anyone else. They can fight for France, vote in France, receive benefits from France, or go settle in Paris. They have 2 deputies that sit in the National Assembly and 2 senators in the Senate. They use the euro and drive on the right side of the road. You walk into the shops and the shelves are full of French products. The presence of people from metropolitan France is visible. It might not be necessary for me to keep emphasizing this because it might not be surprising to anyone else, but Guyana really is a part of France. The significance of this was demonstrated a few years ago when it started to get a stream of asylum seekers, not from nearby Venezuela, but from Syria. Between 2016 and 2018, Guyana would get around 60 Syrian asylum seekers flying to Brazil and crossing the border to claim asylum. But this number jumped up in 2019 to 258. It's a reminder that this slice of South American rainforest is, quite literally, Europe. Since the Guyana Space Center opened, the birth rate has jumped up, and with a fertility rate of 3.8 is much higher than in metropolitan France. Add on to that big waves of migrants from Haiti, and it's kept growing. It now has 10 times the number of people it had in the 1950s. Aside from the Space Center, fishing and forestry are the other main industries, but the entire operation of French Guiana requires significant subsidies from France. Agriculture is minimal, with the Hmong doing most of it, and there's practically no manufacturing. And yet, its GDP per capita is less than half that of metropolitan France's, and it's the second poorest of France's overseas departments. Around 1/5 of the population is unemployed. Despite this, and high poverty rates, the cost of living is really high because almost everything has to be imported, mostly from France, which is a rich country. Buying groceries is hideously expensive. 2017, Guyana erupted in protests and a general strike. People were protesting the high crime rate, cost of living, and poor social services. France responded by increasing spending, pumping around €1 billion into the department, and sending President Macron out there as well. While there have also been earlier violent protests in 1996, 1997, and 2000, support for actual independence remains low. In 2010, there was a referendum on becoming an autonomous overseas territory, as opposed to a department. 70% of voters rejected it. Without France, how could the economy stand by itself? However, the structural problems remain. The dependence on the French state has meant an atrophied private sector. Though in reality it's a poor place, as part of the EU, it's subject to the stringent regulation of a rich country, and the high cost of basically everything makes it hard for any exports to be competitive. And while next door Guyana and Suriname have discovered oil, French Guiana has not, at least so far, and probably won't. The French government has completely banned extraction of crude oil and natural gas in any French territory after 2040, so more exploration is not likely anytime soon because that just isn't enough time to explore, develop, and exploit offshore oil while getting your capital investment back and making any profit. The potential upside could be that if French Guiana can integrate its economy more with Guyana and Suriname as those countries expand off the back of oil, it could reap some benefits and reduce its dependence on the French state. But it's also difficult to see how that could happen across the tariff barriers of the European Union. So what is French Guiana going to do? Where is its economic development going to come from? I wasn't there long enough to get a sense of what it really means to be from Guyana, but that is what we were looking for as we made our way to the capital, Cayenne, to see what we could find. We arrived in Cayenne, unfortunately, just as the market was packing up. Cayenne is, for a capital, very, very small. It ranks something like 100th in terms of population out of all of the cities of France. From above it looks relatively orderly, though on the street level there is certainly a scruffiness about it. Cayenne probably felt the safest of the capitals of the Guyanas, though I still couldn't get a good read on just how safe or unsafe it was. Without doubt it did have an edge that I don't remember noticing in the middle of any city I visited in metropolitan France. We walked around for a while, searching for the centre, where the action happens. I believe we found it, but maybe it was just missing the action. This Jehovah's Witness stand seemed to be one of the busiest spots in town. I couldn't get much of a sense of vibe in Cayenne in a single afternoon, perhaps because we weren't there long enough, or perhaps because there isn't much of one. It might be unfair to expect one because Cayenne, like French Guiana itself, is very small after all. We took the bus back to our apartment, from where we could watch people taking their songbirds for an evening stroll, a common sight throughout the Guyanas. The next morning we were on the road again, heading west. In the final videos of this series, we will turn to the last of the three Guyanas, Suriname, a country with one of the most fascinating stories I have ever heard.